Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. In this podcast, I wanted to speak about Reconstructionist Judaism, which is now officially called Reconstructing Judaism. It is a Jewish movement which was started by a fellow by the name of Mordecai Kaplan. So what I want to do first is talk about where it came from, and then talk about what it is, what it believes in, and then finally, why I think that there are certain problematic aspects to it. Okay. Reconstructionist Judaism, like traditionalist Judaism, was an offshoot of conservative Judaism. However, unlike traditionalist Judaism, which came from Judaism's right wing, conservative Judaism's right wing, Reconstructionist Judaism came from conservative Judaism's left wing. Its beliefs are, in my opinion, rather fascinating, but there are also some problems that I have with it. First, what is it? Reconstructionist Jews have reinterpreted Judaism as an evolving Jewish civilization, which is rather novel. Along with Reform Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism makes up the two major branches of liberal Judaism in the West. They are quite different in some respects, and in other respects have some similarities. Reform Jews are more likely to be monotheists than Reconstructionist Jews, for example. However, there are a lot of Reconstructionist Jews who are also monotheists. So that is not a strict distinction, but it is somewhat of a distinction. In my view, Reconstructionist Judaism is honest, and that's what I like about it. It presents an honest assessment of the development of Judaism from biblical to modern times, which is not really presented, at least with the same degree of sophistication, by other Jewish movements. And here's what I mean by that. Most Jewish movements focus on Jewish practice, Jewish ritual, and Jewish theology. Those are also focused on among Reconstructionist Jews, but not primarily. The primary focus of Reconstructionist Judaism is historical. And so, in saying that Judaism is an evolving Jewish civilization, their point is that Judaism has never been the same. Orthodox Jews, at the other end of the Jewish spectrum, are exactly the opposite. Their entire focus is on Jewish practice and Jewish ritual and all the things that Jews are expected to do in order to be a good practicing Jew. The problem: Orthodox Jews claim to be the direct descendants of biblical Judaism, the Judaism that was taught in the Tanakh. And so, very commonly, Orthodox Jews will call themselves Torah Jews, and they will call Orthodox Judaism Torah Judaism. But is it? Not really. Why? Well, because Torah Judaism, if there ever was such a thing, and I'm not even convinced that there ever was, it may be simply a matter of mythology for all I know, but regardless, Torah Judaism would have been the Judaism that was taught in the Torah. And the Judaism taught in the Torah is not the Judaism taught in Reconstructionist Judaism. Jews who lived prior to 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, paid a tithe to the temple. And all Jews were connected in some way, shape, or form with the temple. After the destruction of the temple, again in 70 AD, that was no longer the case. There was no more temple. And the temple was the center of Jewish life. So, as a result, Jews had to find some other way of being Jewish. And here's what happened. After the diaspora, beginning in 70 AD, the dispersion of Jews from the Holy Land in 70 AD, Jews traveled throughout the world, and there are many Jewish ethnic groups. The three best known are Ashkenazim, which is what I am, Sephardim, which are the Jews from Spain, and Mizraim, which are the Jews from the Middle East. And there are many others as well from other parts of the world, like China and Japan and so forth. They have some similarities, some, but also a lot of differences. So the different ethnic groups came up with different ways of being Jewish. But the central authority for how to be Jewish after the diaspora became the Talmud, not the Bible. The Talmud replaced the Bible. Now, if you were to say that to an Orthodox Jew, I am sure you would get a very, very stern-looking face. Orthodox Jews don't see it that way. But I think historically, that makes perfect sense. If you read the Talmud, and I cannot claim to have read all of it, it's a really, really long collection of volumes, but I have read parts of it. And what I have seen are conversations, in some cases, bitter arguments between rabbis on various issues, theological issues, issues of ritual, issues of doctrine, all sorts of issues that were discussed in the Talmud. So really, Torah Jews should be called Talmud Jews, and Torah Judaism should be called Talmud Judaism, because Orthodox Judaism primarily comes from the Talmud, not from the Torah, not from the Torah, or from the later books which together make up what Christians refer to as the Old Testament, and which Jews refer to as the Tanakh. So the type of Judaism which was now formed on the Jewish ghetto was a thoroughly modern innovation, because it was developed on the ghetto. Many Jews today who are not Orthodox refer to Orthodox Judaism as ghetto Judaism. Well, in a way, they are ghetto Jews too, but not to the same degree, because they are literally, they meaning Orthodox Jews, are literally following a type of Judaism which was developed on the Jewish ghetto by Jewish rabbis. And when I read through the Talmud, I very rarely see consensus. What I usually see is argumentation. Somehow, Jewish rabbis managed to take those arguments and formulate them into new rules and principles for Jewish theology and practice. So, in effect, I would say, what became known as Orthodox Judaism or Ghetto Judaism was not a continuation of the Judaism from the Torah, the old-fashioned Judaism. It was a thoroughly modern innovation. Throughout the centuries, many other groups of Jews came together to form new Jewish movements. For example, you had the Hasidic Jews, which have since been divided into numerous dynasties, but which together today are generally seen as a part of Orthodox Judaism. There is no single Orthodox Judaism. There are many groups which claim to be Orthodox Jews. Generally speaking, however, all of those groups recognize each other as Jews. Not so when it comes to later Jewish movements. So, next down the pike, a direct product of the so-called Jewish Enlightenment was Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism basically said that Judaism, meaning Ghetto Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, needed to be reinterpreted for modern times. But you can't still keep on practicing things which were intended for 1,000 years ago. You needed to update them to conform with the needs of modernity. And that is precisely what Reform Jews did. Then you had conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism was a kind of middle ground between Orthodox and Reform Judaism. However, just as Orthodox Jews reject Reform Judaism as Judaism, they also reject conservative Judaism as Judaism. Now, obviously, if you are a Reform Jew or if you are a conservative Jew, what do you care about what conservative Jews, or rather Orthodox Jews, think? And that's precisely what has happened. You have these different parallel Judaisms called Jewish movements, a concept which in Christianity might be called Jewish denominations, which have developed relatively independently of one another, and which really don't care that much about the ideas and principles that are taught in other Jewish movements. Okay. After Reform Judaism, you had the rise of something called Traditionalist Judaism. Traditionalist Judaism was, I skipped something, the rise of something called Reconstructionist Judaism. Apologies. Reconstructionist Judaism was started by a fellow named Mordecai Kaplan. Kaplan is a controversial figure in the Jewish community for a variety of reasons. First, Reconstructionist Judaism was a branch of conservative Judaism. Originally, it was a splinter from conservative Judaism. What Reconstructionist Jews said is something which I personally think is the most brilliant conclusion that can be made from the history of Judaism, and we'll come back to it in just a bit, that Judaism, according to Mordecai Kaplan, should be properly defined as an evolving Jewish civilization. That makes complete and perfect sense, because in fact, historically, that's exactly what Judaism has been. There has never been a single Judaism. Even in the times of the Bible, you had the Pharisees and you had the Sadducees, two different Jewish movements with very different ideas on Judaism. So has there ever really been a single Judaism? Maybe, but if so, I have no idea what it was. So it really is impossible to talk about Judaism without at the same time talking about religious diversity, because Judaism, like Christianity, like Islam, like Buddhism, has always been a religion which has been based on diversity, tremendous diversity, sometimes even to the point of hostility. After Reconstructionist Judaism, there was a movement developed called the Traditionalist movement. Originally, traditionalism was referred to as conservadox, and the term conservadox is still used by some people. Conservadox was an attempt to kind of form like a balance or a compromise between orthodoxy and conservatism in Judaism. So it tried to be a kind of, I guess, a middle ground or a way of balancing out the best features of both orthodoxy and conservatism, and it became known as conservadox for that reason. More recently, conservadox has turned into a new Jewish movement called traditionalism. So traditionalism and conservadox are essentially the same with one exception, and that is that conservadox is an informal kind of an idea or set of ideas, whereas traditionalism is an actual Jewish movement based on those ideas. The reason why conservadox continues to exist is because there are so few traditionalist congregations around the world that literally it would be impossible for every person who was conservadox to attend a traditionalist temple, shul, synagogue, temple, community center, whatever. There are simply insufficient resources. So that's not a possibility. That's not a realistic possibility. Okay, so let's go back to Reconstructionism, because that is the branch or the movements of Judaism which interest me the most. When I say interests, I don't mean interest me out of a personal theology. I no longer practice Judaism. I left Judaism definitively when I was 14 years old, a year after I was bar mitzvahed. So I am not Jewish based upon most branches of Judaism, although Orthodox Jews would consider me still to be Jewish because my mother was Jewish. So it's very confusing. All these different Jewish movements have different definitions of what it means to be a Jew. Needless to say, I can speak for myself, and I can say that I no longer practice Judaism. Now, whether I am still Jewish is debatable. I don't really care. Sometimes I will say yes, sometimes I will say no. I think it basically depends on my mood more than anything else. Because in the sense of my heritage, my ancestry, yeah, I'm Jewish. That's my ancestry. That's where I come from. But in the sense of what Jews call Yiddishkeit, which is a Yiddish word that translates as Jewishness, meaning the extent to which I actually follow Jewish cultural practices, I'm not Jewish at all because I have no Yiddishkeit, literally, no Yiddishkeit. And that is very common among people like myself whose ancestors migrated to the US from Europe around the turn of the 20th century. Those Jews whose ancestors migrated to the US after World War II generally, but not always, have a greater degree of Yiddishkeit than, say, I would. But that's not the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is to discuss Reconstructionism and then to offer a Maoist-Third Worldist critique on what I see are the problems with Reconstructionism. Reconstructionism acknowledges that there have been these many Judaisms that we have talked about. It affirms that there has never been only one Judaism, and that is true. There has never been only one Judaism. There have always been many Judaisms. Judaism is best looked at as a family, not as an individual. Over the centuries, depending upon cultural circumstances, Judaism evolved in one way or the other. But modern Judaism basically developed on the European Jewish ghetto. And then the various factions of Judaism were splinters from that ghetto Judaism or Orthodox Judaism. So at least Reconstructionist Judaism acknowledges that. What that means essentially is that Reconstructionist Jews focus on the Ashkenazim, which is me, basically Middle European Jews, the Sephardim, Spanish Jews, and the Mizraim, Middle Eastern Jews, but not all the other Jewish movements, and there are many of them. It is primarily those three sectors of the Jewish population which are the focus of Reconstructionism, or as it is today called, Reconstructing Judaism. They've literally changed their official name. I guess they thought it was more catchy, and maybe it is. I don't know. From a Maoist-Third Worldist perspective, the difficulty that I have with Reconstructionism is that it leaves out, or at least minimizes in the case of Mizraim, forms of Judaism that are not either Ashkenazi or Sephardi. And so if you are a Chinese Jew, if you are an Ethiopian Jew, if you are a Japanese Jew, you really don't count that much. Your traditions are not really considered that much when discussing Judaism. So Reconstructionism is essentially an attempt to reconstruct First World Judaism, or, as one might say, Western Judaism, but not Eastern Judaism, or the different Eastern Judaisms. And that, to me, is its number one failing. That although it is certainly an improvement historically, I'm not saying theologically, I'm not making a judgment on the theological superiority of one movement over another. But historically, Reconstructionism or reconstructing Judaism is an improvement over previous movements. Why? Because it is intellectually honest, whereas previous movements have not been intellectually honest. Either they've claimed to be the correct type of Judaism or the best type of Judaism, the only form of Judaism which is accepted by God, or as Orthodox Jews say, Hashem, the name, which is what Hashem means in Hebrew, the name. Reconstructionist Judaism does not make any claim like that at all. Now, is that to say that Reconstructionist Jews are all atheists? No. That is a popular misconception about Reconstructionist Jews, that Reconstructionist Jews are atheists. Now, some are, but certainly not all. I don't know what the precise proportions are, but I have personally known Reconstructionist Jews who were not atheists. So I can say from my personal experience, at least I have known a few. And based upon that, my assumption is that if I've known a few, there are a lot more than that. I think that is a pretty fair guess. And so I like Reconstructionist Judaism because of its honesty. I always appreciate honesty and despise dishonesty. To me, Orthodox Jews, and I'm not talking about them as individuals. I probably should say Orthodox Judaism, not Orthodox Jews, because that would be less offensive. Orthodox Judaism is really based on a lie. It calls itself Torah Judaism. But is it Torah Judaism? Is it Judaism based on the Torah and the rest of the Tanakh? No. It is Judaism based on the Talmud, on debates that were held among the rabbis on the Jewish ghetto. That is what Orthodox Judaism is founded upon. It has nothing whatsoever to do with biblical Judaism or biblical Judaisms. So, like many religions, maybe most religions, there is a desire for something that we refer to in the sociology of religion commonly as triumphalism, because a lot of religions are triumphalistic, meaning they claim that they are the only ones with the correct truth, that everyone else is deceived. But if you follow us, you are following the truth. You will get to heaven, to nirvana, to the Pure Lands, or whatever. But if you don't, you're going to be in pretty bad shape or something. And so I like that Reconstructionist Jews are honest about the historical shaping of Judaism and the current state of Judaism as well. What I dislike is that Reconstructionist Jews exclude most third world forms of Judaism. And for that reason, I would say that Reconstructionist Judaism is first world Reconstructionist Judaism. It is not Reconstructionist Judaism as a whole. And that is a serious defect, because that makes it incompatible with the modern world, a world which is getting smaller and smaller. But Reconstructionist Judaism is not, in my view, really prepared to deal effectively with that modern world, the global nature of Judaism. Instead, it focuses on Judaism from primarily a Western point of view. And that is what it attempts to construct. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.